afternoon, everyone. I found this slide here quite interesting, actually, because if you actually look at the mock-up on the right from the Uber website, it's actually a picture of Melbourne, which is quite interesting, as we're talking about freight and disruptive businesses moving into the mobility sector, as Uber already have, and also how they're looking at logistics. One of the things that's been greatly accelerated, as Kurt mentioned earlier, is the mobility providers actually looking at the fact that they've seen a big downturn in moving of people, so they're now moving to more we can move anything, and that's really one of the big trends that we've seen accelerate during COVID-19. Also, we've seen a lot of behavior change as we are all locked down or still working from home. What we've found is there's plenty of products out there, and whether you're buying an iPhone from Noel Leeman or Dick Smith or wherever, the price is usually about the same, but what people are really looking for is how quickly can they have it without them having to leave home or work. And that's really where that final mile piece comes in, and where Uber and others are starting to play about getting that good directly from the store and delivering it directly to the user within 30 minutes of ordering, rather than a click and collect type model, directly into the hands of the user, even if that person isn't at home or at work, as we've recently seen with Domino's Pizza. They'll deliver your pizza anywhere based on your location services. We're starting to see much more interest in that from the mobility sector and how they can make a play into the final mile freight markets. What's new in the COVID world? Well, what we've seen is, as we know firsthand, there's a big disruption to the supply chain internationally. Less availability of general flights, less availability of freight, lead times. Here in New Zealand, we're struggling to find clothes. That's why I've got a woolly jumper on, probably from a sheep out of the field. But all seriously, if you go to some of our, H&M, you won't find any medium or large size clothes. They're completely out of stock because the freight just isn't getting through for whatever reason here in New Zealand. And it doesn't sound like it's the same problem in Australia, which is great. The ability to secure drivers, and I'll give you some examples of some innovation that happened with New Zealand Post and Super Shuttle during the lockdown, which helped keep people in work, but also help the mobility service company really pivot and support traditional courier and freight provider services. And what we're going to see much more of is a change in user behavior. People won't be going into work as much, as it's been very well documented. Working from home, so that impulse just nipping out to the store to go and grab it at lunchtime, you're going to see much more of that, and that's where we're going to see even more pressure on the final mile delivery. One of the things that I've tried to group together is decentralized delivery. I don't know if you've seen, within the Uber application now, you can go and get Uber to go and pick up something on your behalf and deliver it to a location. And that wider piece of mobility providers shifting their thinking from moving people to actually we can move anything that you want us to be able to move, because they have plenty of capacity right now as ridership's down. And really then how businesses are really moving towards outcome-based partnerships. So rather than procuring a driver network, is going to more of designated areas. And if you move a parcel within a designated area and it's tracked and it hits that KPI, you get given the price for that parcel based on whatever the service level agreement is. That could be operated by a member of the public, a freight company, a ride sharing company. As long as they have the right licenses and the right safe vehicle, they'll be able to participate in these types of marketplaces. And then what we're starting to see is a bit of a shift in the value chain. So taking that opportunity to own the customer experience. So rather than just getting more efficiencies in how we deliver logistics, particularly final mile logistics, is what are the new types of business models and additional opportunities to generate revenue by getting a little bit closer to the customer. So as you know, disruption to supply chain, getting the goods, getting the capacity, and then also, as came from the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, they just published a report on the drone industry, the golden area for drones within the freight industry for moving drones for that final mile. So we're starting to see much more of that, Uber's parcel delivery, and then the wider logistic issues. So what do I mean by decentralized delivery? As you can see here on the left, this is a screenshot from Uber. Uber Connect allows you to just go in and pick up parcels, goods and more. and they will deliver that to any way that you want to do in real time straight away. What we're also seeing, we're seeing partners then go away and partner with, you know, merchants, retailers, where they can actually go and pick up on the behalf and then drop that parcel in real time to an individual who will then pay a little bit extra. The other thing that we saw during COVID was the partnerships of, you know, existing mobility providers like Super Shuttle, for example, who pre-COVID, most of their trips were moving people to and from the airport. During COVID, they actually partnered with New Zealand Post to actually move parcels and do the final mile moving of parcels. What's really great to see is now things have returned relatively back to normal here in New Zealand. They're actually now doing a hybrid of moving people and parcels from their airport into the CBD based on an outcome price pricing model per unit, which is allowing them to, you know, do 2 tasks with 1 driver, 1 vehicle, and reduce the amount of kilometers driven on the road for trips that they were already doing anyway. That really drives into how you mentioned earlier around the acceleration of new services and products. The golden age of drones, you know, we can talk about drones all day long. Eventually they will come. There's definitely been, they've never been as busy as they are right now. Be interesting to see what the wider uptake of that is in any of the policy and regulation environments. Here in New Zealand, even though things are back to normal, our traffic travel times are still down by about 30% based on pre-COVID. So, you know, either a lot of people have been made redundant, or there's a lot more people working from home, or the tourism factor has really had a big impact on New Zealand. It's too early to say, but what we do know is been about at least a 35% reduction in travel times across our key cities across New Zealand, which is insightful. Also, there's a lot of opportunity. Amazon has never been as profitable as they are today, and you know, Goldman Sachs seeing a 28% upside in the growth of Amazon. And I'll give you some examples around that later, based on how you can build networks on the back of the logistic backbone that help provide marketplaces and merchants to compete with the organizations like Amazon, as Ben mentioned about, you know, Australia first, and you know, thinking of Australia as an ecosystem. But the real key driver here that's going to drive a lot of it is consumer demand. They're finding things that they want things very quickly now. Having 2-3 days turnaround isn't really good enough. They want things in real time. People are already quite impatient, and it's already accelerating. They want it right there, right then, and they're willing to pay a premium for it as well. Interestingly, Hermes in the UK have just created 10,000 new jobs to actually cope with the massive spike in internet shopping that's occurred during the lockdown, and actually start to create more premium services that compete with things like Amazon Prime and that get me that parcel or get me my goods right now, rather than having to get it through logistics to the distribution center and out for final delivery. Is going to this integrating into stock management systems, picking up the product and then distributing it. Which finally brings me on to the warehouse here in New Zealand. They're doing just that. They've just closed 4 stores. And they're actually starting to create some dark stores now, which will become local distribution centres for that final mile delivery to users in the more regional parts of New Zealand. Changes in the value chain. So for me, some great use cases. So you may or may not have heard of Mercado Libre and Magazine Luiza. Magazine Luiza were a distribution company in 2013. And they actually pivoted and built an actual e-commerce platform out based on their logistics and supply chain network that allowed them to connect the marketplace into there, took care of the logistics, managed the user experience for delivery, and you know, essentially tried to compete with Amazon. And if you look at here in 2015, their share price was, you know, a little over $6. As of yesterday, it was $87 US. And what's really interesting between Mercado Libre in Brazil and Magazine Luiza, they've actually been able to keep Amazon at bay in Brazil, and Amazon are struggling to gain traction because, you know, they had the logistical knowledge, just like a lot of you guys are. Is how do you use the supply chain backbone that you have today to build merchants, build additional value, and provide a great customer experience. And one of those here is Pronto. So again, this is an extract from Harvey Norman. Within Harvey Norman, you can go onto here, and for an additional price, which is outside of the normal shipping costs, the user can opt in to pay an additional price and have that parcel delivered to them within the hour. That involves someone going to the store, collecting that iPad, and then delivering it to the user's location in real time using the location services from that individual's mobile phone. So again, additional value for it. And then really to summarize, now is the time to consider your position in the value chain. It's not too late just to sit back and wait for Amazon to really move aggressively in this space into Australia. You have a great logistics network, partnering with merchants, services, and customer experiences. You can actually get closer to the customer through collaboration by unlocking that data and insights. Keep looking for efficiency, but also try and unlock new innovation models, like some of the examples that we've seen today, to get closer to the customer. There's a lot of retail companies that are really willing to try things differently. Based off post-COVID, you have a great access to your customers. If we see areas locking down again, the products are useless unless you can get them in the hands of your customers. And that's really where it used to be the product followed by the delivery merchant. During a lockdown type of environment or reduced mobility, it's actually mobility is the number one driver. How can I get it? And then, what's the price and the other hygiene factors. You will already have a massive amount of data, and the networks that you already have been and will carry on to be instrumental to the logistic network. Whether that be Uber or others to come in and replicate it is very difficult to do, very expensive, and takes a long time of learning, as you know. I would really leverage that and try and build partnerships on top of your existing logistics platforms. Because goods are easy to source. The question is, how quickly can I have them without leaving home and work? That's a direct quote from multiple people as we've been doing research post-COVID. And the really only way to do that is we're dealing with big, complex problems here. The real opportunity is to partner, innovate, test, refine, and learn from one another, and iterate things quickly, throw in a few buzzwords in there, be a bit more agile, share information with each other, and just be really clear on what the purpose of what you're trying to achieve is at the start of it, and iterate together in partnerships as you go. So that's my quick introduction, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to Joshua Innately, who's the Director of Analytics, and he's going to give you some more practical examples of some of the things that I've just spoken about during that presentation. Over to you, Joshua.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for that insight into sort of the future state of what's going to be possible, or what is becoming possible in terms of freight and logistics. As Ben and Martin said, my name's Josh. I'm the Director of Analytics at Smash Delta. And I thought I'd spend some time today digging into some examples of what's possible, some sort of use cases in the future state of where we could be with a data-enabled future. So as a starting point, logistics networks that we currently have are in a state that we've never seen before. Everything we know about how they operate is being challenged by COVID-19, which we hope is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We're experiencing an upheaval both in the way we operate supply chains and the way we deal with demand, from the complete shutdown of manufacturing overseas in some cases, to restrictions on the volume of domestic transport, even to demand for products at a scale that could never have been anticipated. I'm thinking of the toilet paper crisis that we saw in Australia. I'd like to step through some examples of how we can use data, technology, and AI to help us short-circuit solutions to both BAU problems and those problems presented in such uncertain times when demand can change on a button. And fundamentally, as I'm sure many of you are aware, logistics itself is driven by demand. Anticipating and responding to it in the most efficient way is the core goal of any logistics network. Logistics optimization really comes in two forms. The first is moving medium to large quantities of goods to a relatively few number of locations. And effectively, when we do this, we're aggregating multiple demands to a single location. For example, moving goods from a single warehouse to a single distribution center. The second type is moving smaller quantities of goods to a potentially huge number of locations. And in this case, we're aggregating multiple demands into a single source of fulfillment. An example of this is how we fulfill multiple e-commerce orders from a single distribution center. Both of these forms share many common challenges and solutions in how we optimize what we move and also in how we move. Our plan today is to demonstrate some of what's possible when using data, analytics, and AI to optimize the how in the way we move. There's a whole field of study that revolves around getting people and goods from place to place. The term used to describe them is routing problems. Many of you will be familiar with some of them and the whole host of software and solutions that exist out there, but fundamentally they're broken down into two parts. The first way we address them is the way we represent our logistics network. And the way that it's often done is what's called a network graph. Now, in this context, a graph is not bars and lines, but a collection of entities that are linked together and form a sprawling network. For example, consider a set of warehouses and distribution centers. Each physical location would be an entity that we can represent as a node, and we can then draw links between them that represent the costs of moving goods between them, and these are called edges. So these nodes and edges, as you can see on the screen, comprise our graph, and that represents our network in a structured mathematical way that gives us lots of flexibility in analysis. So this type of model is usually implemented in software systems where each delivery and pickup point is a node in the graph, and the road network of Sydney and its associated traffic patterns are used to build out our edges. That is, the links that define the cost of travel between any 2 points. The way we assign costs to these edges can be flexible. For example, we can use travel time as our cost, or depending on our needs as a business, we could use distance traveled or mileage. It's even possible to apply extra cost penalties for things like toll roads or height restrictions, or even less fuel efficient routes, for example, surface roads against freeways and highways. Actually, while I'm on that, one of the questions that was put through was how we can manage the challenges of weight restrictions on certain bridges and infrastructure. And I think those sort of insight, that knowledge about where those limitations exist can be built into these sort of vehicle routing problems to minimize the impact of overweight vehicles. So once we have this good representation of our network, we then need to consider the whole host of options about how we can analyze it. And as I mentioned before, this is a broad field of study and it's been around for decades, in fact, probably close to a century. It's most often embodied now in what we call vehicle routing problems. Again, you may have heard of it, but it's basically a way of identifying the most optimal solution to movements across a network graph. It's especially relevant in the context of B2C and generally in last mile freight. Vehicle routing problems are more than just GPS navigation. They involve the optimization of routes for individual vehicles, and this is often called the traveling salesman problem, and even for whole groups of travelers or vehicles, and minimizing the total travel time across all their routes combined, which is often called the multiple vehicle routing problem. It has applications in both B2C and B2B contexts with regards to fleet optimization. And there's a whole huge variety of algorithms that can be used to solve these problems, as well as other optimization challenges on our networks. However, we have to be clever and use some principles of computer science and mathematics to quickly find the best route. If we consider every possible combination of every road and every destination, it'll take far too long to compute an ideal path. Instead, we can use machine learning and AI to find routes that are almost perfect, but can be worked out very quickly. So there are many solutions to this that already exist, and some of these forms are ubiquitous in our daily lives. Every time you use map software or a GPS nav tool, it searches for the fastest route from one point to another in a timescale that's functional for you. Leveraging the most up-to-date analytical techniques in connection with your data can allow for smarter optimizations, which can automatically account for things like the number of vehicles available in your fleet, the shipping and vehicle capacity, delivery pickup and pickup time windows, as well as maximum drive times that individual drivers may have. So let's look at some examples of how these problems can be solved with a modern and data-driven technology stack. We've decided primarily to focus on the second type of problem in this presentation, which typically manifests from a need to push inventory from distribution centers to stores or to fulfilling multiple customer orders from a single delivery vehicle. Here's an example of how we could represent a stack of orders that were placed in the last 24 hours and are due for fulfillment today. As you can imagine, in the post-COVID world, with work from home way up and a second wave of infections starting to appear, we're seeing significant increases in demand for home delivery and pressure on our networks, which we've never before seen. So in this case, we have to work out the best order of stops, so we have to consider the routes from every delivery destination to every other to find the optimal solution. Let's look at the case where we're looking at a case where 3 delivery vehicles are available, and therefore breaking down the problem into 3 subgroups. However, we may have limitations on our network that need to be factored in differently. We could instruct the algorithm to work off only 2 trucks if need be and find the optimal solution in that context. So this is an example of a multiple vehicle routing problem that I mentioned before. And as I said, these problems can be very difficult to compute, to optimize computationally due to the sheer number of possible combinations, but there are solutions. There are many approximate solutions to these given routing problems, and they can be generated more efficiently by several methods. You can use heuristics, Markov chain optimization, or even solutions inspired by nature like genetic algorithms. In that case, they mirror the survival of the fittest properties of Darwin's theory of evolution to produce successive generations of solutions that optimize via an evolutionary process into a near optimal one. From a business perspective, it's an essential part of the process to not just optimize for the sake of KPIs, but to close the loop on the commercial value associated with the optimization and use that to feed back into the optimization process and to quantify and understand the business benefit of the improved logistics efficiency. Solving these problems efficiently and applying the solution to our operations can have a real impact on our bottom line. Let's now consider a more complex example, which will really help us become more competitive in the post-COVID world. Again, by modeling our logistics network, but this time in more real time, as a network graph, we can develop processes and algorithms to react quickly and efficiently to disruptions on the network. Roads in most Australian metropolitan areas at the moment are so highly leveraged and susceptible to minor breakdowns in flow that conditions can change very suddenly. For those of you who live in Sydney and Melbourne, I'm sure you've had that experience before. And that's not to mention special events, construction and other planned activities or interruptions that can take anywhere from days to years to resolve. We already have access to live data feeds on road and traffic conditions, and with historical data, we can develop predictive solutions to anticipate significant traffic changes as they deviate from the norm. If we combine these with smart algorithms for managing our fleets, we can ensure that the delaying effect is minimized. In this example, you can see two routes for delivery schedules in Sydney's eastern suburbs, and their routes have been calculated to be optimal, given what's known the day before about what goods need to move where. These planned routes were calculated based on certain assumptions about the road network and the amount of time it typically takes to travel from one point to another. But however, when these assumptions become invalid because of interruptions on the road, like in this example, a breakdown on Allison Road near Centennial Park, it's essential that we can adapt to this information in real time so that deliveries aren't brought to a grinding halt by these interruptions. Knowledge of these interruptions can be driven by live feeds to traffic conditions or even predictive modelling based on historical trends. The ability to quickly recalculate the optimal fleet allocation, avoiding the interrupted area where possible, and then communicating this to the drivers, whether it be ones who are already on the road or ahead of a day's deliveries, is crucial in ensuring that the fleet still functions efficiently and that drivers are not wasting their time stuck in traffic or having to reroute themselves individually on the fly. This coordinated live adaptation to changing road conditions can only be possible if driven by data. It requires a strong knowledge of every point that needs to be visited, a quantitative understanding of the expected delays, and exact information about vehicle availability and capacity. Now let's consider a way we can operate with even more real-time data and closer to what we call a true just-in-time logistics methodology. In this example, our truck is moving through the network along its planned route that was assigned as it left the depot this morning. Here we can see it moving along its path, but consider this, a new order has just come in. Normally, that order would be added to the delivery route for tomorrow's schedule, but what if we can fit it into our route today? If our systems are tightly integrated, we could potentially identify a solution that fits within our current route. Here we can see that one of our brick and mortar stores has the item we need for that customer, and so we can integrate a detour to pick it up and drop it off into our route without blowing out our existing schedule. An integrated solution could communicate with the store to find the product on the floor, reroute the vehicle to the new destination, and inform the customer to expect their product sooner than anticipated. In doing this, we've reduced our delivery load for tomorrow, we've leveraged inventory that's already close to the customer that can be replenished much more economically during our usual distribution cycles, and we've created an amazing customer story. It's also worth noting that a scenario like this can also be an optional process. AIs and other algorithmic decision-making tools can be deployed on top of these systems to govern this process. They perform the optimization of the new route and then using anything from a set of simple rules to advanced machine learning, make a decision on whether this detour maneuver is worth performing for the business. Solutions like this could factor in all sorts of contextual information in making that decision, like a customer's loyalty patterns, or even at the checkout stage, giving the customer an option to pay extra for delivery on the same day when the system at the time can confirm it's possible. So what can we do now? Let's start by asking a few key questions about our business. Firstly, how resilient are our practices now? When the panic buying started earlier this year, how did our inventory and distribution practices handle it? Next, how well integrated are our systems? How much visibility do we have over who and what is where right now? And lastly, how quickly can we respond operationally? Can we make a decision that impacts what happens this week? What about today? Or what about within the hour? So data collection these days is relatively easy. The freight and logistics industries have always been pioneers in innovation for tracking and data collection. You probably already have huge quantities of data that you can use to get started with. And there are plenty of other open source, open data sources and options to consider, like OpenStreetMaps and GNAV. And then a whole host of open source tools and algorithms which can be customized and implemented for bespoke optimizations and analytics on top of your existing systems and networks. Our approach to problems usually is to start by proving up a solution using a model or a digital twin type tool, like the one we demonstrated for our visualizations. With a proof of concept model, you can justify the investment in a larger scale rollout. So I hope that these examples have helped to illuminate just how much is possible today. And if you're keen to get started and want to just get stuck into something or need some support as you develop some of these ideas and how they could work, feel free to reach out to us for a chat. There are a few questions that have come through, so I think I'm going to field a couple of them and then pass some of them on to the team. Let me just move my screen. Where is it? So one question that came through, am I still presenting? Yep, here we go. One question that came through was, what would be the opposite of a product-driven market? And I think that was in response to Ben's commentary on the state of the product-driven market as it currently stands. Ben, would you like to jump in and give an answer to that?
I certainly would if I can find, yeah, I found it. There we go. Great question. So the sort of paradigm around why a product-driven market is causing us problems is really one of sequencing. And it's the idea that for a senior leader or a problem owner inside government or the corporate world who is trying to unpick how to get moving, and if they reach out to market, what often comes back are things that have already been built. And they've been built once and they've been sold to a lot of people. And the reality is that just doesn't work for a bunch of the reasons that I laid out. And so the opposite of that is enabling organizations and problem owners to get what we would call a tech agnostic approach. So that's to really understand the components of the problem, the components of all the different technologies that are available out there in the market, and then building some proof and building some evidence base to show that that problem can be solved and that there's a cost-efficient way to do so. Then that serves as a springboard to then say, okay, let's go to market. Let's look at technology providers. But the difference is the sequencing. And so those leaders and those problem owners have been able to get a sense of what's possible first. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Ben. At this point, I'd like also to just thank you and the whole team at Smash Delta. I think you've done a marvelous job at demonstrating what's possible. There is already lots of data out there, but the question for all of us is how we're going to use it and how we can use it to improve operations from an efficiency, a cost, a distance, a time point of view, and use it to enhance our product and service offerings to our end customers. Because at the end of the day, that's where the business growth opportunity lies for all of us. So we have got a little bit of time now for questions, and thank you to those of you who have been busy submitting questions on the way. we're going to sort of work through as many of them as we can get through now. And I'm like to take the first one, which is from Chris at Cubic, and he's. I'd like Kirk, perhaps if you could comment on what's the one thing or the several things that transport operators want to understand about the road network in either slow time or even real time. What's the information that operators in the industry want and need?
Well, thanks, Chris. It is an intriguing question, and I'll be difficult with my answer, because I think the reality is a lot of transport operators, even the largest, most successful and most sophisticated companies, truly don't understand what the data will show to them. So a recent contemporary example, I'm sure Toll wouldn't mind me sharing this. Toll put up a whole lot of data for a project that Ian's involved in as well with the National Freight Data Hub. And so their idea was to put up the data and they might be able to get something back of it in terms, really what they were thinking was probably route optimization. So they thought with their huge fleets that putting the data in, they might get a little bit more information about how to optimize their route, maybe go slightly longer, less time, and do that sort of number crunching algorithm. But the surprise out of it was, for Chris, was that's actually not where they ended up with it. What the revelation of the data showed that their opportunity lay not in route optimization, but in their fleet optimization. And without first seeing the data, they would never have conceived of that opportunity. So that's where I think is the really exciting piece, is once we start to get clarity of the operations out there, then our traditional views of the world of, you know, what route can we use? Can we get authority to cross that bridge? Should be dealing with that particular council to change the rules about it. In fact, what we do is a revelation of an entirely different world and entirely different opportunities that come up just because of the clarity of the observation that we have on the systems. And we're seeing more and more of that all the time as we get more data coming through. And particularly, I started off on that whole idea of being able to absolutely ascertain the point of origin. Other people hadn't really thought about that, but then we heard in our data conference at the end of last year, remember when we can get together personally, it was a wonderful time, that we found that one guy said that from a Chinese perspective, about 50% of the Australian wine being consumed in China was not Australian wine. And I think that's where the huge opportunity for us is to get a hold of that data. So not really to do with the freight and the road network and all the other things, but if we could just seal that one piece, then a much more high value market, which would be terrible for me, because I've certainly enjoyed my wine during the COVID lockdown.
Thanks, Kirk. That leads very nicely into another question that was raised by Lee Mang, speaking about, so what data needs to be made visible or made available along the supply chain to support the export of valuable Australian, typically food products, into Asian markets. What are the data elements that are going to be most important to that delivery process and retaining the value proposition along the supply chain?
Is that one for me?
If you wouldn't mind, yeah, I'll start with you.
I'll lead off into it anyway. So one of the wonderful pieces about that new infrastructure that we don't yet have our grasp on yet, Western Sydney Airport, in 5.5 years now, when that project is finished, we are 12 hours from 2/3 of the world's population. So that says, you know, wow, this is just game changing. And to take the question from China, I think that's where we need to use the technology and the data and the thinking to add value to that supply chain, to give the certainty that's not there at the moment. And I don't say it critically. I think that this is a global issue about the provenance of materials. And I don't want to dwell on it, but for me, it's one of those, something that's deliverable right now with the technology we have right now, but it's still not actually being done with great clarity. So I think that that is an enormous opportunity for our country, and also for the markets that want to consume this. In China, for example, the milk powder scare. They want to be absolutely sure that that milk is what they're paying a premium for, and they deserve to have that certainty, and it's our job to give it.
Thanks, Kirk. So from distant markets to markets closer to home, I've got a question here from Ride Romalingen, which goes to the question of multiple deliveries to a single building. So he's using the example of photocopy paper that has to be delivered to every office in a 30-story building, but typically that ends up being, just dozens and dozens and dozens of different deliveries of photocopy paper. So it's clearly an opportunity and a need for consolidation. But Sam, I'm wondering if you could reflect on how we should go about achieving consolidation when it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And I'd like to come out and say that there's a magic, a magic thing to do, but I think it's that simple of contacting them all and getting together and talking. I mean, that's how it goes through the building, delivery system, through, good old-fashioned getting on the phone, talking to the building manager, and identifying it all, and then doing it from there. Unless there's some systems that you can tap into that are through the building, where the deliveries are all registered, and there are a number of buildings, particularly new ones like Emporium in Melbourne, and as well a couple in Sydney, that actually have to have all of those deliveries registered. So that would be an easier way to do it, because you could probably identify what the delivery was. But yeah, sorry, I haven't got any quick fix there. But I think it really does raise the issue that the human side, yes, you can get, the routing is so important, and the automation and the technology, but at the end of the day as well, you've got to have the human side where you just, talk about making sense, and common sense and things like that, talking to people, communicating, because I think at the end of the day, if you don't communicate, whether that's personal communication or technology, communication, it has to happen to make logistics work, because logistics is predicated on communication in all its forms.
So that's a good answer, and it leads into the interesting question of how do we combine people and technology to deliver better solutions. I've got a question here. It's just disappeared. But anyways, a question from Sajid, who was asking how should we encourage industry participants to make stronger use of data and data tools, analytic tools, to either lift their game, or, as Kirk points and Ben both pointed out, find new business opportunities. Perhaps Sam, would you like to have a quick go at that? And perhaps Ben, I don't know if you can like to follow on.
Yeah. So sorry, can you just repeat that?
So how do we encourage people in industry to make use of the emerging tool, the data, the tools, and to either improve their businesses or actually increase their businesses by capturing, developing additional services or business models?
Yeah, so that is a big challenge, and again, unless and what's come to the fore with COVID is communication. So everyone says, oh, it's communication. We can just communicate via teleconference or whatever. But then people are realizing, oh, actually, I don't want to communicate just by video. I actually want to see people face to face. I want to see them in the corridor and things like that, and I'd say at least half the people who are working from home are realizing that. So this technology being a complete duplicate for interpersonal, is not actually true, but still a large part can be kind of replaced, let's say. But again, it's back to the old-fashioned thing. That's why the whole partnerships work was done, and why it's working overseas is getting everybody together, communicating, having a champion whose job is basically to go around and talk to people to bring them together, and whether that and then it's about whether it's a round table virtually or in reality, or whether it's through other channels as well. You're really just getting people together and connecting in, and this is why Austroads and ARB has been pushing that kind of approach for the cities, but sometimes, you know, who's going to lead that within the city? Who's going to lead it? Is it an industry based, or is it government going to be their kind of independent leader? In London, it was the university that did it. But who's going to set it up, own it, and then just make it happen? You know,
Thanks,
at the end of the day, it's about making it happen.
Ben, you've had a bit of exposure to this problem, this question. Two words for the last answer to the last question.
Sure, in 2 words. You've got two players in this space, the people providing the ideas and solutions, and I'll include industry and academia in that. And then you've got the people needing to use these solutions. So on the provider side, we've got to respect people, speak in plain English, respect the domain knowledge that sits inside these organizations, and collaborate to do real things and improve it. And on the user side, we've got to get more adventurous and dive in and give it a go. And know that the benefit of working in the data space is it will be really obvious if it works or if it doesn't. And so we just got to dive in.
Thank you, Ben. So that brings us to time. There are a bunch more questions that have been asked, and we'll undertake to get answers to the questioners back to them after this event. I want to thank all the panelists for their insightful contributions. It's been really great. And I thank all the attendees for giving up your time. I hope this discussion has been helpful, and if it leads you to think about doing new and different things, then that would be great. We all exist here to help you make that happen. So at this point, I'll say thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you again, either virtually or ultimately in person. Thanks a lot. Cheers.